And my second son's wife, she's just 27. She had a brain stroke. So they live in Gurugram or Gurgaon. So he just called me to give me an update on how she is. So I'm sorry, I am a little delayed, but we'll get going. Okay. Right. So let's get on with it. The other day I was talking to you about Benedict Anderson, and I told you that the whole argument of Benedict Anderson's that the what should we say? Uh, the idea of a nation is an imagined community. I told you that kind of thing does not apply. Okay, and he says it's done through basically newspapers, because he was writing at the time of newspapers. So these are not imagined this thing, they are real nation states. So, but when we come to political philosophy, when we start looking at this whole movement, which is called the linguistic turn that I talked to you about, this itself generated new forms of thinking. When I say it generated new forms of thinking, what I am trying to tell you is that the structuralists, if you remember Claude Lévi-Strauss, whom I told you, anthropologist, who was also a structuralist, people like him have basically said that when they did cultural anthropology, they believe that you have to dismantle cultures in order to understand how a certain way of life evolved in particular communities. Okay, now that also got applied to political philosophy. And when it got applied to political philosophy, it was probably the first person to have done something on the lines of questioning a text. Okay, because I'm talking to you now about Martin Heidegger. Okay, M-A-R-T-I-N, Martin, H-E-I-D-E-G-G-E-R, Heidegger. Martin Heidegger is somebody who came up with a particular concept. In German, he called it Destrukt. Okay, D-E-S-T-R-U-K-T. In German, Destruct. That is the same as the English destruction, destruct, destroy. It is the same as that. Okay, so his idea was that when you look at a text does not give you the actual information of that particular period. Okay, the reason why it does not give you a correct information about that period is because there are many types of language used in order to construct one's reality. I told you when we were looking at this whole idea of mirroring reality. What did I tell you? I told you that, you know, people believe that political philosophy should show what the society is like. The stance taken by Martin Heidegger is very, very different from that. He says political philosophy does not mirror reality, it hides reality. It hides reality in the language that is used by different philosophers to explain their reality. So he came up with the idea of destroy. Okay, let's not use the word destruct in German, though he did use that term destruct. So there are three things you should know about Martin Heidegger. There are many things about him, but three things that you should know about Martin Heidegger. These three things are: first, sign. Okay, sign, S-E-I-N, sign in German, and in English it means being with a capital B, which is our state of being, our state of existence. That is sign. Okay, and the second concept is Zeit, Z-E-I-T. Zeit is what he calls time. Okay, Zeit, not he. In German, it is time. Okay, sign and he, the book that he wrote is Sign und Zeit, U-N-D. U-N-D is and. Okay, so sign und Zeit, in that he claims that our being born is like being thrown into the world. Okay, so Martin Heidegger inaugurated a phase of phenomenology that later on became the most accepted paradigm of phenomenology. He says it's when we are born, it's like somebody has thrown us into this world. He calls it the thrownness of being, Thrown, Thrownness, thrownness of being, with a capital B again. We are thrown into the world. And he says it's like being thrown into a forest. Okay, all you can see is a canopy of trees on top of you. All you can see is just a canopy of trees on top of you. And if you're trying to see the trees on top of you, you cannot see anything. You do not know where you are. You do not understand where we are going. You have no concept of where, why, how. This is the thrownness of being. So he says the Dasein, D-A-S-E-I-N, Dasein is the being, should go look for a clearing in the forest. A clearing is where there is a clear patch of land with no trees on top of you. Then you can start making sense of directions. Then you can start looking at what we should do, which way should we go, how should we approach the world. Okay, so that is an analogy that he has given. So similarly, reading a book is like that. Okay, not any book, reading a text of political philosophy is where you have been thrown to read this book. And how do you make sense of it? Because he says ideas are not conveyed by the language, but ideas are hidden in the verbiage. Verbiage is the words that people have used. Those are words which basically hide what is it that a philosopher is trying to convey. Because meanings of words mutate over time. Okay, I gave you an example once of virtue. Virtue for the Greeks meant excellence. Virtue for the Romans meant manliness. And virtue for the Christians meant leading a life as per Christian ethics, leading a good moral life, right? So if you're reading Plato and if you're reading virtue, then there is a very good chance that you will conflate the meaning of virtue as you understand it into his usage of that term. So Plato might not have meant what you think he meant. He might have meant something else, which is he would have said excellence, right? So he says when you're looking at texts from the past, political philosophical texts, you have to destroy them. By that he's not saying, you know, uh, set them on fire or tear them apart or anything like that. What he means by that is that he's asking you to look at each sentence, tear it apart, and see what kind of a meaning it gives to you. Okay, that is basically, Rakesh, I think you need to mute your mic if you don't mind. If we have to try and, thank you, Rakesh. We have to understand that it is political philosophy does not convey ideas, but it conceals ideas. That is the understanding that we have to come to. That is the concept of destruct in Martin Heidegger. Okay, now there is another stream of thought in structuralism. In structuralism, people say that there is a unification of all knowledge, and this came from mainly Chomskyan theory of linguistics. You must have heard of Noam Chomsky, Noam, Noam, Chomsky, Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky was actually a linguistic philosopher. He has done some path-breaking work in linguistics, which is languages, the study of languages, structures of languages. But later on, he became a political activist, and now he's more known as a political thinker than a linguistic thinker. But he was a linguistic structuralist, and he introduced the concept of semiotics, Semiotics. Before that, in Europe, it was called semiology under Ferdinand de Saussure, about whom I have talked to you. I'm not repeating that. And Chomsky talks about this as semiotics. So every word and every sentence has these three things: syntax, it has semantics, and semiotics. So every single word and sentence that you write, you basically are looking at these three things built into it. And these, he says, are not something that have evolved out of consensus. They have not evolved out of consensus among people saying this is correct grammar, syntax is grammar, okay, this is the correct meaning. He says, no, it did not evolve like that. How did it evolve then? He says, we are born with structures of language in our head. Okay, we have language, the structure of it in our head. And he says, all languages spoken by Homo sapiens, the species, all these languages are those which are, how do you put it? Uh, these are uh, uh, these are having a common structure of grammar and meanings and symbolisms. They all have a common structure. Okay, and that is what makes it possible for people to be polyglot. Polyglot is Polyglot. Polyglot is being able to speak many languages. Okay, why are we able to speak many languages? We are able to speak many languages simply because all languages have an underlying structure which is similar. It is completely similar. And therefore, he said, of all the three things of syntax, of semantics, and semiotics, semiotics is the most important. Semiotics becomes the most important because it is that which conveys ideas through symbols, and symbols are not actual literal symbols, but even the way in which you use a language. I gave you an example the other day. If you say the forests are infested with Maoists, if you use that sentence, then already I know what you're saying. You are an anti-Maoist. Because infestation is that which you use originally in demonology. It was demons, supernatural beings. But later on, you know, infestation is all kinds of, what should we say, insects, uh, woodworms, all these kind of things are called, those which destroy things are called infestations. So if you say the uh, jungles of Chhattisgarh, for example, are infested with Maoists, then I already know what your stand regarding the Maoists is. Okay? Or if you say, if you, in Hyderabad, in my childhood, there was one word for policeman, okay, which was a very uncharitable word, extremely uncharitable. Policemen were called khatmal, right? They were called khatmal. Khatmal is Urdu. What is khatmal in Urdu? It is a bug, a bed bug, actually. So the moment you say, you see a policeman and say khatmal, obviously it means that you have no respect for that institution because you don't know that individual. Okay, you are probably seeing him for the first time in your life. But if you call him khatmal, then it basically means that you are against that person. So semiotics are to be inferred. So you're against the police. Now, why are you against the police? You could have many reasons. In those days, apparently, in the days before I grew up and came to hear this word, this was there even in my father's time. And if somebody did not put a lantern on their bicycle, then they would be told that you you have to pay a fine, okay, in the night if you didn't put uh, this thing. So khatmal, the usage will tell you that you have a problem, and the problem is that you don't like him. He's going to try to fleece you, whatever it is, or he'll take a bribe from you. So that is an attitude. So the word is not just a word. It talks of your attitude. It talks of your attitude, how you refer to your teachers. Okay, all my teachers in school had nicknames. I'm sure your teachers also have nicknames. I'm sure you have nicknames for me. There might be many. It could be anything. Dubbatodu, Motegadu, whatever it is. You have all these kind of things. What does that suggest? It suggests that you don't think too much of your teachers. Okay? It suggests that you slightly disrespect them for whatever reasons. Okay? You may have your reasons for it, but you probably will say, this is the reason why I disrespect. Anyway, but having said that, let me tell you that Chomsky says that it is the dismantling of the semiotics that leads to understanding. And he says anybody can learn any language. And I always tell my students who say English is a foreign language, there is no foreign language. It is foreign only in terms of its being spoken in a distant land. But it's not foreign. Let me just give you an example. A couple, let us say one of them is German. The father is German. The mother is French. They have had a son. Now I have taken the son away as soon as he was born, brought him to my house, and I started bringing him up. When I am bringing him up, which language is he exposed to? He's exposed to Telugu. So if he is exposed to Telugu, then he learns Telugu. So what has his birth got to do with the language he's learning? It is the exposure to the language that makes you learn a kind of language. Okay, so I have a friend who married a Spanish lady. They live in America. And their son speaks fluent Telugu, fluent Spanish, and fluent English. Now, English and Spanish, we may say, are European languages. But what about Telugu? He speaks extremely fluent Telugu. He doesn't look anything like an Indian. Okay, but he can speak. If you ask him to speak Swahili, you leave him for some time in Africa, he will learn Swahili. Anyone can learn any language. That is because of the structures of language that are there. So Chomsky says semiotics is what we should be concentrating upon. Semiotics is what will give us the power to understand the meanings that are there in texts. Okay, apart from syntax and semantics, he's not saying that they are unimportant. They come to you naturally anyway, but it is the semantics. Even if you have gone and met, say, a tribal in Africa, a tribal person in Africa, and that person is coming at you with a spear in hand, if you say this, he will understand that you're saying, don't do this to me. Don't kill me with this spear. That is also language. That is the semiotic. So semiotic is there in words and it is also there in gestures. Sometimes semiotics is also there in silences. Okay. At the end of my class, or sometimes when I'm called for lectures here and there, I give a lecture and say any questions, and there is people sitting like this. What does that convey? It conveys my utter failure to evoke interest in what I spoke. It conveys my complete failure in communicating with my audience. It conveys this thing that they just tolerated me out of decency. That's what it conveys. So silence need not be, sometimes people say silence is agreement. That is one of the sayings in English. If you are silent, it means you have agreed to something. Need not be. Silence can be disagreement. Silence can also mean disinterest, which is I'm not interested. You say what you say, go. You come, you go. You finish saying what you said. So that is also semiotics. So this is how you have to understand philosophies, politics, political philosophies. Any teacher of international relations will tell you that globalization, liberalization, all these things began in the 1990s. Okay. P.V. Narasimha Rao is called the father of economic reforms when it should actually be Manmohan Singh who carried that out. But it didn't start in 1990s. It started somewhere in the 16th century with colonialism. Globalization started with colonialism when all these colonial powers went in search of new lands, found new lands, like the two American continents, the North American continent, the South American continent, okay, the islands which came to be called West Indies, Australia, all these were unknown till 300 years ago. Now they are known, 400 years. Okay, so that is when globalization began. People have been speaking English in this country from 19th century. Indians have been speaking from 19th century. So what globalization are you talking about here? You have only carried out what is called an economic reform, which is technically called structural integration, which is integrate your economy into the global economy. That is the thing that was done in 1990s. We all studied in English medium. Wasn't that globalization? I studied in Christian missionary schools. Isn't that globalization? Is Christian religion indigenous to India? We've had Muslims living here in India for thousands of years. Is that something that happened in 1990s? No, globalization is an old phenomenon. It's an extremely old phenomenon. So what you need to understand, therefore, is, see, this is the kind of misunderstandings that you can have. If you say globalization began in 1990s, then you're talking rubbish. Because globalization began, the first colonizers were not the Europeans, it were the Arabs. The Arabs tried to come to India. The Arabs went into Africa. Okay, Swahili is actually a language which has a lot of Arabic in it and some mixture of local languages of Africa. It's not an African language purely. Okay, it's a lot of Arabic. The Persian conquerors, the Mongols who conquered different parts of the world. So this is an old phenomenon. Why are we saying that globalization started 20 years ago, 30 years ago? It didn't. It started thousands of years ago. When people went to different countries, conquered them, that was the beginning of globalization. Cultures began integrating. So that's what Chomsky will tell you. Study the symbols. Study the cultural influences by interpreting the symbols. Then you will get to the idea behind all that. What about our institutions? Legislature, judiciary. Did we have these before? They came with the British. But they didn't come in 1990. They came much before, much before. The day we became a viceroyalty after the revolution of 1857, the revolt of 1857, after that when we became a viceroyalty, our parliament was the British parliament because we became direct subjects of the monarch of England. So our ruler was the monarch of England. Our first parliament was the British Parliament, the House of Lords, the House of Commons. Our first prime minister was a British person who was then the prime minister. Our first civil servants were British people, but in the 19th century itself, Indians appeared for the exam that was called ICS, Indian Civil Service Examination. It was conducted by the University of Cambridge, sometimes by the University of Oxford, and people passed these exams. Dada Bhai Nauroji got elected to the House of Commons, and he represented the Indian interest there. So this is what our history tells us. But we don't look into the layers of history. We look at the common writings that are available to us. Now I'm using the term layers. And Michel Foucault, M-I-C-H-E-L, Michel, F-O-U-C-A-U-L-T, Foucault. Michel Foucault basically says ideas are hidden in layers and layers of language. So what did he talk about? Though he says, I am not a structuralist. People said, you are a structuralist. He said, no, I'm not a structuralist. And to a certain extent, he was right. He was right because actually, if you look at Foucault's writings, not all of them are consistent with each other. Okay, but that's a separate thing. But what he suggested was that we have to conduct an archaeology of texts. What is archaeology normally? You dig up the earth and try to find what was there beneath. That is how Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, all of them came out through archaeology, right? We found dinosaur fossils in different parts of the world, mainly most of them in the two American continents. They seem to have inhabited those continents more than India. In India, we have one or two types. I remember one name, which is called Rajasaurus nurmadensis. Saurus is a reptile. Okay, it was a big dinosaur. So Raja is an Indian word. Rajasaurus, king reptile, found on the banks of the river Narmada. So Narmadensis. Rajasaurus nurmadensis is, and then there are one or two other, I don't remember the names and I don't want to. I have only one person as audience left. So thank you, Prashant, for staying. If you also went away, then I could have just maybe shut up and gone home. I mean, I am home. I could have gone away. Anyway, so basically, what Foucault says is meanings are hidden in these layers and layers of language. Do archaeology. Do archaeology. Archaeology here is using symbolically. Just as you dig up the earth to bring out hidden cities, hidden civilizations, Pompeii, which was buried under the ashes of the explosions of Mount Vesuvius, the volcano. In our own country, Mohenjo-daro, Harappa. So he says, similarly, in social sciences, also one has to do archaeology. When you do archaeology, then you reach that particular point where you will start understanding why this word has first of all come into being. So when I meet you tomorrow, Prashant, I guess you'll be the only one. I will talk to you about Foucault's madness and how he interprets that along with civilization. So Prashant, thank you very much for staying. The rest have all gone. I don't know. Maybe I always